this video, we're going to be introducing the 4 main classes of biochemistry. Okay, the 4 main groups that we have. And what this is biochemistry is biology and chemistry. So because these are chemicals, they're made up of elements from our periodic table, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, things like that. And so they are chemicals, but yet they're inside of living things. And so that's the area of biology, but yet they're chemicals. So that's where we get biochemistry from. We also call these macromolecules. Macro means large or giant molecules. Not giant as far as we still need microscopes to see them, but they are much bigger compared to other chemicals in the body. There are 4 main groups or classes to these living molecules, and they some of them are kind of hit upon in this cartoon. We have Hansel and Gretel here at the witch's house, and of course, it was made of sugar and candy. Sugar is carbohydrates. We have fat, which would be lipids, cholesterol, which would fit into the lipids. So if we take a look at the 4 classes, carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and then nucleic acids, and nucleic acids would be your DNA. When we're looking at these 4 groups of things, we need to know that they are called organic compounds. And the reason that they are organic is because they contain carbon. And in organic chemistry, you would be studying any chemical that has carbon in it. There are many things that fall into that category. All 4 of ours are organic because they all contain carbon. If you hear something's called inorganic, I-N, then they do not contain carbon. So like water, for instance, H2O, it would be an inorganic molecule. And then we have polymers. You'll hear the word polymer. Polymer is a large molecule, so the kind of macromolecule and polymer sometimes are used interchangeably. They're not exactly the same thing. But a polymer is just a really large molecule that's made up of small pieces. So if you've ever played with Legos or Lincoln Logs, or I don't know, there's all sorts of little building things now that you can get. You take the small pieces, the individual parts, and you can bond them together in all sorts of different ways. You could put them, like all the red ones here, then all the blue ones. You could make a pattern of different variety. You could just use all the red ones and not use any blue ones. So there's a huge variety that you can have when it comes to a polymer because they're made up of, they're made up of those smaller parts. And you can link them together by bonds, chemical bonds. Now, as far as the examples of our 4 that are polymers would be carbohydrates, proteins, and nucleic acids. And each one of those 3 is made up of one repeating unit that repeats itself over and over and over again. And we'll talk about each one when we talk about carbs. We'll talk about what its monomer is, and proteins has a different monomer than carbohydrates does, and so each one has something different. So we'll talk about them when we get into more detail with each one. Lastly, we have dehydration synthesis, and we have a video here we'll watch in just a second, that YouTube video that kind of shows this. But when you hear the word dehydration, you think of lack of water. You're missing water. Synthesis means to make. So literally, dehydration synthesis means that you're losing water and you're making something. That's what that means. And in this case, you are taking 2 molecules, 2 of those small individual pieces like the Legos, and when you lose a water between them, you can bond them together. So you're making something bigger by taking a water out of it. And this is how we join monomers inside of our body when we make larger structures, like when we make DNA, when we make fats. All of those things, we are joining the monomers together, and it's going through a process of dehydration synthesis. It takes energy to do that, and it occurs only when we have enzyme help. Enzymes aren't something that we've talked about yet, but we'll have a video about that at a later time. Now, the opposite of that is hydrolysis. Hydro means water when you're hydrated. Lysis means to cut. So you're using water and you're cutting something. And in hydrolysis, it's the opposite. We're going to take the bond that we formed here. We're going to break that bond. And when we do that, we have to put the water we took, we have to put that back into the two pieces. So with that, let's watch this little YouTube video here. You can see with this that one of them lost an OH and the other molecule lost an H. So there's our water that we formed, and notice that a bond was created, and we call this a disaccharide because this is two sugars. Di is two. Now hydrolysis is the opposite. Notice the water went back in, and when that happened, you had the two separate individual things again. So we're going to watch that really quick one more time because it's short. Dehydration, lose the water. Synthesis means to make, put together. So notice the two sugars are now bonded together. So we've created something bigger, dehydration, synthesis. The opposite of that is hydrolysis. That means to cut. So the bond here is gone, and that water gets put back into it. So that's the difference between dehydration, synthesis, and hydrolysis.